So we are going to have three communications with Everardo Reyes Garcia, Enzo D'Armenio, and Bruno Surace. So let's start with Everardo Reyes Garcia, who is a professor in the Department of Digital Humanities at the University Paris 8. He co-directs the Master in Digital Humanities and is Vice President of the University for Digital Affairs. He's a member of the lab Paragraph and an associate member of the Cultural Analytics Lab. His research focuses on the fields of information design, media art, hypermedia, and digital culture. He combines semiotic theory with experimental practice using software, programming languages, and visual computing techniques. He has organized several conferences and exhibitions dedicated to digital art and web studies. He directed the art papers program for SIGGRAPH in 2019 and is a member of the Bureau of the International Symposium on Electronic Arts. He has published, edited, and translated a dozen of books, including the monograph, The Image Interface, Graphic Support for Visual Information. And Everardo is going to present a communication titled More Than a Feeling, Relationship Between Cognition and Digital Media. Everardo, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Christina, and to everybody for being here, and those who are connected at their offices or their home. And thanks, of course, to the organizers, Maria Giulia, Massimo, and Claudio, who's the first time that I'm meeting in person, thankfully, finally. Yeah. So what I got the invitation from the organizers about thinking about communication that talks about visual semiotics and cognition and the face as well. I came back to some of my background and mainly to interfaces, user interfaces, and software design, or at least design of digital tools, content. So that's what I would like to talk about. So it's great to be back to the Facets team and gatherings, because I remember the first one was 3 years exactly ago in Poland, and at that time I was saying, well, you know, you don't know what this is going to lead, and I was thinking that maybe at some point you would be interested as a team to create, to develop, to gather images, to analyze images, to restitute these images in graphical form. So at that time, what I was saying is that I identified some what I call interface logics, inspired by some other colleagues that work on media logics, even games. We have operational logics. Ian Bogart talks about that. So what I said is that, well, you know, interfaces like general public or like are easy to use or presented such as easy to use for the general public, such as Microsoft Azure, include those kind of interface logics. So I was saying, well, perhaps it should be good to understand or to establish a dialogue with such user interfaces as a language, indeed, as a language object, as a cultural object, as a mediation between what the sender and the receiver, the creator and the viewer are. They are living between. So that was the thing that I was saying. So these were the 9 interface logics that I identified at that time. And so now, 3 years afterwards, I would like to present the following plan, because it's of course in close relation to what has been said before. I would like to take a step back, up, or to the front, or I don't know. I would like to relate to media, to images, to screens, but from the side of the interface, the user interface that is required to access, to interact with those visual graphical content. So I am mainly in the expression part from a semiotic point of view. And of course, thinking about this expression content, what is the relationship with us as a viewer and creators? So mainly, I'm going to also focus on cognition. So media and software, part 1 of 4. Let me start with this. Perhaps you have, of course, seen this face because it became super famous. I remember it from many photographs, books back in the 80s, in the 90s. My uncle had this one, this book, and I opened that, and it was this woman like everywhere, right? So I'm seeing you like smiling. Perhaps you already know the story because she was not a artificially generated face, right? She was indeed a model, Lina Forsen, who was indeed published this photo in a Playboy issue in '72. So the following year it was scanned and used, and so purposely used as a test image for image processing, mainly tasks or routines. So, well, this is one example that I chose it because it's from 2013. That's almost 40 years after the photo was taken. That's still used, right? So, what I'm saying is that it became super famous. Even it appeared in the cover of the book of very respectable, reputable, and influential books on digital image processing. So what's interesting is that, well, first of all, this is we need so this kind of test images. We want to use those images. Then, if we think about media not as what we are seeing in the image, but about what the materiality of the image is, then we think about indeed the software that is used to access, to view, or to manipulate those images, right? So what I'm saying is that if you open this image with, let's say, Photoshop, we have access to, well, a variety, of course, of tools, a variety of methods that are, of course, chosen, done, developed to meet some requirements by, say, a community, in this case of perhaps digital artists or designers who relate or use Photoshop, okay? It could be, of course, that you use other similar software, and this is what's interesting, that sometimes using or choosing the software that you want to use is also an ideological choice, not only a technical, not only an economic, but also sometimes really an ideological choice. So why do you use Photoshop instead of GIMP, for instance? Anyhow, when you access those, you have this canonical way of accessing those functions, actions, through this user interface. We call this the menu, of course. You have this list of actions. If you open the same image in another software, this one is called Fiji. Fiji stands for Fiji is just image J. Which is so image J is a software for scientific visualization. That means that it's used by medicines and radiologists. So you have more or less the same access, the same menus and this organization of tools and commands. But perhaps this is when we start seeing that there's a different language, right? There's a different language that addresses the functions, the actions. It's sometimes even interesting to notice that one same, let's say, routine or series of actions could be called the same in two different words or terms or vocabulary for two different software or applications. And that's, of course, because those software are developed, done, and distributed by communities or sectors, right? So this is only just a quick, brief example through what we can access. I think that's what's interesting is that many of those software are, of course, so as you can see, format or image format like JPG or PNG. So it's possible to, those software are based on that format, so we can open any JPG in those software, and at the same time, those software are compiled to be open in operating systems such as Mac OS. So I think that there's no excuse. I mean, for researchers that are interested in digital images, digital media, to install, to go ahead and try those kind of tools, because we are also dealing with ideology, right? So this is what I am. I think that's what I'm saying. To make a quick point, that digital media have become really mediated through software. Of course, we can print, we can show, we can exhibit, we can do many other stuff, but still software remains a strong actor in these ecosystems. Software is mainly used through user interface, and I would say mainly because, of course, many other software uses command line or other things, but mainly media formats allow the interoperability of software. And I would quote my colleague Lev Manovich, media today is really a set of software techniques constantly in development. So starting from there, I'm going to go to this point number 2, cognitive approaches. So what and how do we relate? Because that's what I was promising my title, right? So what would be those relationships between media, images, and cognition? So I'll have to go back, as I was saying, to one of my primary or fields that I studied while doing my PhD was on hypertext. Hypertext, hypermedia could be something like, sounds very archaeological or very from the last century. And I'm sorry if there are some colleagues here, but indeed, what I think is that hypertext, of course, when the web came, it has two effects, right? For some, the web became equivalent to hypertext, but on the other side, we forgot what a real, fully developed hypertext system implies. So I think that also implicitly, some hypertext techniques on hypermedia became also the operating system. So back at that time, we were saying, okay, so hypertext can be studied from two standpoints: systems, which is very technical, and models, which is what we see on the screen. And what we see on screen can be, of course, from a cognitive perspective, could be, analyzed or studied from cognitive sciences. That means that we understand the users as in their human capacities, dealing with non-linearity, ergonomics, like human factors, but also the properties of the device, because that's when we were saying, okay, so it's not the same if you want to explore a system in a small screen or in a big screen, in a touch screen, or in a, so ergonomics. And many of those models were really oriented towards education. How can we teach and learn through hypertext systems? In the 86, one of the really influential books that I read at that time was this one, Understanding Computers and Cognition, by Terry Winograd and Fernando Flores, who, by the way, Terry Winograd would direct the thesis of some guys who then developed Google, right? So Larry Page, and Sergey Brin. And Fernando Flores was a politician in Chile. So what they said in that book is that language was very important for thinking about doing software or designing applications. So they said that, well, language, of course, you are reading here what I am saying is that, so the context of the language was so very, very important. This theory is still valid today. It's still used, and of course there are many other theories for designing system, like user-oriented, like participatory design, many emotional design, many let's say trends on design. But the thing is that they were like putting attention to language, so and context. I'm thinking what from a semiotics point of view, I think we understand that, of course, in a society, the background of the viewer, of course, it's very important for understanding and establishing dialogue, right? By those years, of course, Brenda Laurel edited this book. She was working for Apple with one of the main designers, Alan Kay. And Alan Kay in this book was saying that he got really inspired. His own personal view about interface design came from psychology, indeed, and specifically from Jerome Bruner and Jean Piaget. So he was saying, well, it's about doing with images makes symbols. That was the motto, right? So there were multiple mentalities identified by Bruner, which is inactive, iconic, symbolic. And it was about like building on those capacities or human capacities to make like systems user-friendly or operational. Well, that was happening at that time. My lab started a series of conferences dedicated to hypertext that still exists today, the H2PTM, hypertext, hypermedia. So we at that time at the lab we got like bigger with the psychology team who came to the lab, especially Pierre Rabardel, who was working on ergonomics, and he came saying that, well, there's this notion of le sujet capable, that the user who understands, who would like to, such as Gilbert Simondon would say, like to establish a more deep dialogue with the tools and to understand how they work and to see them more than just material properties. So yeah, in summary, that's what could be said, that the user is seen from many different angles, many different like a multidimensional actor, and systems unavoidable have to perhaps choose one point of view or take in consideration the complexity besides or that surrounds the human user. So again, I will not specifically read what you are seeing on screen, but these are some of the images about the user. So then to my last part, some experiences, because as you may know, I really like to do my own stuff, to program a little bit some experiences in order to see how stuff work. So let me show you just a couple of examples, because at that time when in our team we were saying, okay, this is good, but is it possible to challenge those traditions and to go to use or to create or to design tools, but indeed as an argument, not only as a tool to be used or to solve a necessity or to answer a practical defined question, but rather a tool that would be a subjective argument or proposition. So that was the idea. How do we do something different with what exists? And of course, as you know, when you use software, and if you want to do your own tools, you have to go to the lower level, which implies using computer code, or programming code. So this is, I think that was important at that time, and I think that's still important today, even though the results could be sorry because it's not regenerating this. That's the problem of being live, right? But well, yeah, this one is okay. So these are stain poems. My advisor Jean-Pierre Valp was doing what he calls stain poems that relate to life, and the idea was to propose something radically different. Again, with my experiments, of course, this one is so the idea is to start interrogating, questioning, not precisely what we see in the media, in the image, but how can we see the image differently? How can we use the tools, perhaps, that we use differently? How do we, I am interested in making new kinds of images. So this is a small piece of software that the only thing that would do is to just take a picture and then represent the same picture as a series of pixels. It's been interactive. So the thing is that, I mean, the idea was to start interrogating and saying that, of course, what Massimo was saying about scales is interesting because we can analyze 1,000, 2,000 different images, but if you see the image itself, it is 1,000 or 2,000 pixels, right? So we have different views. Well, this is the same, in the same line stuff that it's done just to see the image differently. It's even an animation, this one. We can just do different cool stuff with images and using a little bit of goodwill and computer code, right? This one I cannot show because I will not take more of your time, but I mean, with students at the lab, we are trying to do exactly, I mean, that kind of stuff, like analyzing visual information in different ways. Okay? And then to come to my last point, I wanted to say that this is, I call the presentation more than a feeling, because it's not only cognition important for our academic or artistic or creative or engineering work, but also the emotional aspect, also the way that we relate between us with others. And I think that we establish this kind of links between us because we get along well, because we like or we understand. So what I'm saying is that this kind of representations in here is like an effort to trace those kind of relationships and saying, well, in time, we can like, besides or beyond cognition, there's also emotions that can be connected, traced, and said that in this case, because I am a little bit involved with this association called SIGGRAPH, we extracted all the pieces that have been exhibited from 81 to 2019. We can see some stuff, and really interesting for specialists in the field, patterns such as Daniel Sandin, who was working with other colleagues such as Donna Cox, but it was interesting to see how he related to one of the guys who has exhibited the most at SIGGRAPH, which is Charles Suri. Anyhow, but maybe some is for the specialists. We can also see in here that in time as well, a couple of artists or still work together or create or do work, and it's interesting to see that in time, of course. This is just one last example to say that I've been working also with other colleagues, such as Andres Burbano, with what we call emotional networks that I will tell this story in at another occasion, but we were working on the Mexican origins of cybernetics. So it's interesting to see how a person whose name is Enrique Freyman in the center played a key role on publishing cybernetics in 1948, because he was a Mexican editor living in Paris, and Wiener was a computer scientist, neuroscientist, working with Arturo Rosenbluth in Mexico. And why he met Arturo? Because he was also meeting some other Mexicans, Santillana, and well, it's another story, and many other key figures are involved, such as Diego Rivera, Gandhi, Nicola Bourbaki, who was also published by Enrique Freyman. And they say that even Freeman invented Bourbaki. Well, anyhow, this is another story that I will tell at another time, but it is really an emotional network, right? So I think that that's what I was trying to say. I think that I am a little bit far from my time, right?
No, you have 5 minutes more if you want. Yes. Okay.
So, well, this is what I am saying, is that all those kind of tools, software, artworks, if you want, experiments, visual experiments, graphical experiments, combine different meanings. There's, of course, this technical one, which is the most, the basic, has to work or has not to work if we want it not to work in a certain way. There is, of course, this content domain, how the language, the terms, the vocabulary are employed through the interface, of course. But there's also this bigger cultural, ideological layer, which I think is also implied and very important. This is a device that I propose to analyze those kind of images. But I think that is why sometimes we can understand some websites where the language that is written, perhaps we don't understand at first, right? Unless you know Bulgarian and you have been to the visual anthropology lab at EU. But we understand, of course, the graphical, the visual composition. We understand this, what I'm calling the technical, even perhaps the content domain. We can even project in this embodied cognitive capacity that if we click on those bars, it will perhaps, you can even imagine that it will slide. You can even imagine that it will slide to upper or to lower part of the screen. And I think that's the same that we can, or that's an interesting method to analyze or to understand or to relate with AI and machine learning interfaces, because not only they become easy, super easy to use, they invite to be used, but now we can also try to create our own tools based on those procedures. So this one is a website that Hugging Face. I don't know what Face is again here, but it's like a sandbox to create your own models. So conclusions, and that's what I'm saying today, is that it's important to not forget and to work on multi-support, multicultural, and even intergenerational media, because some of these software perhaps will not be used in 5 years. Maybe there's going to be other. That's what we all say to our students, that I don't know what's going to be the next TikTok, but TikTok is going to be, you are going to be the old generation in 10 years that use TikTok today. So we'll see. Speculative experimental informatics, it shows how software behave differently. That's why I think it's important to do experiments, even if they are like weird, mainly through ruptures of function, because we have to understand even such rupture, when you have a bug, you have to understand why this bug is happening. And so we understand how the software operates, right? I think that's it. Lessons from hypertext cognitive model. This is very straightforward, and perhaps we are not into the solving problems that we are not even know what the problem is, right? So we have to perhaps wait. So merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.